Okay, how's everybody doing? Welcome back to another week of the DSKUS program, the Data Science Exchange program. If you guys are doing well, we're getting near to the halfway point of the program here in the next couple of weeks. So kind of be transitioning into some new topics. Hopefully you guys are progressing well on the various assignments you have. We're kind of in the middle of the brainstorming month of the program. So this is often the trickiest part for students when they're kind of working on a data science project. So last week we talked about design sketches and stuff like that. This week we're going to talk about some other things related to brainstorming that we kind of need to think about before we go into the sort of final month. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about prototyping methods. Like how do we actually design a system, right, that people can interact with. One of the things that we have to take into account, so let me say this first, one of the things we have to take into account is that when we deploy these policies or really any data science solution, there are going to be people involved, right? People are going to look at the information that our system produces and then maybe take actions. Maybe that information may be provided in the form of decision support or for workers or policymakers, or it might be provided as information to try to help end users, maybe it's customers, or maybe it's private citizens, make better decisions in their daily life. So this is often not talked about a lot in data science, but the reality is we're building systems that are going to interface with people. We kind of forget that sometimes when we're talking about machine learning and deep learning and building models and analyzing data. But the reality is at the end, we're going to be producing something that is going to interact with human beings, because otherwise, how are we going to influence the human world, right? It makes sense. So that all means we need to think carefully about that kind of part of our proposed solution. If our solution doesn't have any way to get back to the end users or to the decision makers or the policy makers or whoever it is, then it's kind of just useless. It's like an interesting thing we built that exists, but nobody can ever use. So it's kind of pointless. So all of this means we need to think about these things. And one of the things we should think about, one of the things you guys should start to think about as you're kind of designing your proposed solution, along with here's how we're going to analyze all the data and here's what the data is going to be, is how are those sort of recommendations, decisions, the sort of output of your models, your analytical methods, of your system, how's the output of that going to get back to somebody? What are they going to see, and how are they going to interact with it? And is it going to be an ongoing fashion? Are they going to use it daily, like a dashboard or a website or a mobile app? Or is it something they'll just go to periodically when they need information? Or might it even just be a quarterly, kind of report type thing, But the reality is, if people are going to use what you're proposing in an ongoing fashion, there's going to have to be some way for people to interact with that. That means that you should have to also start to think about how we're going to collect feedback from people, right? Because situations are going to change, circumstances are going to change, new scenarios are going to arise, new events are going to occur, new types of technology are going to be created. And what we should look for are ways that we can gather feedback from our users in an ongoing fashion to make sure that we're actually meeting their needs, that our solution is still actually accomplishing its goal. So one thing that we have to do then is think about a mechanism for collecting these types of feedback, right? How can we know that we're actually still accomplishing, we designed a system 2 years ago. How can we know it's still actually meeting the needs of the people that we designed it for, right? I mean, it's a very basic question. So we're going to have to come up with some mechanisms for this, and we should probably build these into our final proposal. We should probably make this part of our data science solution. Otherwise, we're kind of missing a core piece of what is going to make our solution work long term, right? One thing about policy is that we want it to be sustainable, right? We're not creating a policy for the next 2 weeks. We're creating a policy for the next 6 months, the next year, maybe the next 10 years. So it needs to have some sustainability. So thinking about how people interact with these technologies, this is a field that's referred to as human computer interaction. There's a ton of stuff on it out in the research literature. You can read about it. And people teach classes. I teach some classes related to this stuff too. Most of my stuff has to do with robots and interactive like IoT technology, sensors and wearables and these kinds of things, right? These are some robots that we work on in my lab. But the basic idea here is we want to study how people are going to interact with technology, and we want to make sure that the things we design are usable and that they're usable in a long-term sense. It's not that they're usable today. I mean, that's great, but really the question is, are they still going to be usable next week, next month, next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, right? I mean, eventually we can replace the technology, but the reality is things need to last for a while, right? And our proposed policy solutions are going to need to last for a while, right? We're not going to be changing policy every month. That's going to, going to make us look like we're kind of crazy people, right? We want to have some consistency. So, I do this stuff with robots. We collect this data, and see how people interact with it. And then we try to build better robots. We try to get them to behave in ways that people actually find more beneficial, right? But more broadly, outside of my work with robotics and kind of doing data science and on robots and interactive technology and Internet of Things stuff, we can also think about like HCI from a perspective of how user interfaces are designed, right? So for a lot of your guys' proposed policy solutions, one thing you might want to think about is, you may want to have like a website, or you may want to have a smartphone app, right? Or some sort of dashboard or report or something that maybe, policymakers, people at the embassies or government are looking at on an ongoing fashion. So then the question is, what is this interface going to look like? What functionality does it need? What information should it be showing? How should that information be being presented, right? So these are things we can look at through HCI. We can start to look at the various components of our user interfaces, from the input that the users may provide to the sort of processing that goes on in the back end and the software. And then we're going to deliver something back to the hardware as output, and it would be displayed, or maybe they might have speakers or whatever, right? But we can think about this, and then we can design all these different components, right, for our user interface. And we can think about how this is going to work, right? Maybe people will come into our website and they'll click on things, and then we'll take that information, and then maybe some database processing will happen, and then we'll output some information that'll help them decide, we're trying to decide, who to send this foreign aid to this month, what industries to invest in. Well, maybe I need some dashboard or interface to help me realize, we're going to invest in Southern Vietnam. Well, what have we invested in the past, and what's been the outcomes, and which industry should we put the money into for the next 6 months, right? Next 3 months. Where should we just got this $5 million from the government. What should we do with it, right? We're trying to do foreign aid. You think of the same thing with all the rest of the projects, disinformation campaigns, monitoring them, global warming, trying to figure out energy efficiency. You might want to have dashboards for that, smartphone, web faces, whatever, right? So we can think about these user interfaces, right? So, user interfaces are actually having the information directed directly back to the hardware, like with these robots. The output of the model is actually changing the behavior of the robots or the devices, right? And you can imagine if you had a power plant, you're trying to control global warming or do something, and you had a power plant, maybe you're feeding information back in from your models back to the power plant to help them, to actually to help them control the machinery or make it more efficient. All these just, brainstorming things around your projects, but you can hopefully get the idea that we want to we want to provide the information back. Otherwise, it's just out there in a black box and nobody sees it. Nobody can do anything with it, right? So when we're creating interfaces, at least for people, there's some different ways we can go through this. I won't go through these in detail, but there's several different ways we can evaluate the kinds of interfaces, the kinds of information we provide back to end users, and think about whether it is the best solution, right? So we can do something called A/B testing, where we create different versions and just test them with different groups of users. We can run focus groups where we bring users in and kind of have them talk in small groups about, have them interact with the technology and just talk about it. And then we do case studies where we actually put the technology into the real world and we follow users like in detail. Like we actually watch them use it in detail over a period of time and gather data about that to understand how people are actually going to use these things, because it's often different than what we think in when we're building models and doing machine learning, right? A/B testing, I'll kind of what I said, give you an example of this one, but the other ones apply too. Like the common way we use this on websites, right? We have one interface and we show that to half our users, and we have a different version. We show that to the other half, and then we see how efficient it is based on some metrics, right? So A/B testing is a common example of this. And then of course the metrics are important too. So what data are we actually going to collect, right? Commonly people use instruments, either sort of standardized instruments or instruments they create themselves. These tend to be Likert scales. So the same thing you guys do when you evaluate courses, and they're like on a scale of 1 to 5, did you like the course? That's a 5. Or did you hate the course? That's a 1, right? And then you scale it. So people create these same kind of scales for sort of evaluating technology. There are also standardized scales like the TAM and the UTOT and various scales like the NASA TLX that they've developed over time that've been psychometrically validated. You can use these standardized metrics, right? These standardized usability metrics, or you can just come up with your own instruments, right? Scientifically, if you come up with your own instruments, sometimes people criticize you, but if you're doing data science in the real world, sometimes there's not really an instrument to collect the information that you need about that particular technology. And so your only choice is to make your own instrument, and, you're not doing science per se. So, sometimes it's okay to do that, right? And sometimes you do use the standardized instruments. And then sometimes people collect direct metrics, right? Sometimes you actually see like how many clicks does it take to accomplish some task? How much time do people spend using our site? What's the latency time? When people make a request, how long does it take for them to get the information back that they were trying to find, right? These are all different ways we can evaluate the output of our data science models when we build these interfaces or these tools that we're going to give to end users, right? Now, let me say this. This all sounds good, right? We're going to design things that people find useful. People get this wrong so much. There's so much bad design in the world, it's almost painful. And I talk to my students here in Korea, like we actually need more HCI in Korea, probably I'd say, but this is true in America too. There's so many places where you go and you look at things and you're like, who designed this? Did you ever stop and ask the users, like, does this make sense? And because probably most of them would try it and be like, this is the stupidest thing. This is the stupidest thing I've ever used. And if you just take a little time and just kind of build it in as part of a component of your system, then you can make sure that you're actually meeting the user needs and it's actually useful and they're actually going to find it beneficial. And it's not really that hard, but you just look around you, like you'll see so many examples of poor design, both computer systems and also just poorly designed elevators and doors and just other things where the designer had an idea in his head of what he thought it should be, but they never actually went out and asked other people, like the stakeholders, like, here's what you need. This is related to what we were talking about last week with the data infrastructure components. We talked a lot about having sensors collect data in an ongoing fashion. We can kind of think of this kind of part as kind of closing the loop, right? Now we're going to talk about the output. We're going to provide information back to users or back to maybe the devices themselves so that they can do things automatically. So it's kind of like bringing everything full circle. But if we're really going to develop data science solutions, this is what it takes, right? If all you have is a machine learning model, then you don't have a solution. You have a model and nobody can actually use it. So we have to think about deployability and actually building these other components of our system. And this is going to be important for you guys when you're coming up with your design sketches and when you're coming up with your proposals and when you're developing your final solution, is to think about what's the input and then, the processing, the analysis, the modeling, but then what's the output? Who's going to see this? What are they going to do with it? How is it going to actually affect their decisions, right? Those are key parts of actually building a successful data science solution. And they're going to be key parts of coming up with a successful, deployable, data science driven policy proposal. Otherwise, you don't actually have a solution, right? You just have a model and nobody can use it, right? So in summary, we need to think about the data we're going to collect before deployment and after, right? So we can obviously gather data sets and do some analysis, but then after we deploy it, we're probably going to want to collect data in an ongoing fashion. And we should plan for this. We should plan to make this part of our solution. It can't be an afterthought. We got to think about from day one, how are we going to actually collect data so that we can maintain and update our models so that we can provide user feedback, so we can make sure if the situation or scenario changes that our system is still working, right? And success and failure are going to depend on this, right? In a data science world, this is what it means to create solutions, right? Not just models, not just do some analysis, but actually create a solution that people can use, right? It's very, very important. I'll kind of go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but not. And what I'll say is one thing that's really important to understand about modern human social organization is this notion of tribal psychology. We dress up in these costumes now and we walk around and we think we're so fancy and cultured, but the reality is our minds are still in some ways very primitive. And we still behave based on our sort of caveman brain. And our caveman brain tells us that, the tribe is important. If we are, we're social beings and humans, we want to be part of the tribe. If we get kicked out of the tribe, if they're like, get out, you're out of the tribe, in most of human history, that would have meant that we were at a very serious risk of dying. Humans don't survive alone. We survive in groups. Modern technology has made it possible for us to survive alone. But for most of human history, for millions of years, surviving on your own was very difficult. If anything happened, if you got injured, if you're attacked by a leopard, you're kind of screwed, right? So being part of the tribe was really important. Or if you got attacked by other humans, if you're just a random lone person and you come across a group of 20 people, they're just gonna take all your shit, right? So being part of the tribe, being kicked out of the tribe was death, right? And in modern times, we still behave this way. Modern social organizations, political units, businesses, school clubs, they all are basically modern human tribes. And we very much still behave using this tribal psychology that's just hardwired in our brain, right? You see the same thing if you go watch chimpanzees at the zoo, actually. You'll see them do very similar behaviors. It's kind of creepy, right? So as data scientists, something we need to think about is that if these businesses, these organizations, these political units are essentially modern tribes, we have to think about them as sort of our data science solutions are going to be co-opted into these tribal social systems. If we are successful, what they're going to do is they're going to take our solution, they're going to say, this is ours now, and they're going to make it part of their tribal culture. It's going to become part of their workflow, part of their process, part of the way that they think about who they are and what they do, right? And we have to understand this. There's a psychological component to this that's very important. Even if our solution is 100% effective, people won't use it unless they feel like it's part of their sort of tribal sort of identity, part of their culture, right? They have to be able to take it, claim it, and make it their own, right? And they're going to co-opt it. And what you have to realize too is they already have systems and beliefs and behaviors and customs ingrained in these modern tribal units, these political units, these businesses. And so whatever solution you have is going to have to integrate into what is already there. It's not like it's like a blank canvas. There's already stuff there. And if your solution contradicts something that already exists, it's going to be difficult for them to use it. So we have to think about this. More than likely what's going to happen, and this is a huge policy issue, is people are going to take what you build and they're going to use it in a different way than you intended. This happens all the time. In fact, I would say 99% of the time, this is what happens. A data scientist, a data engineer, a technologist, whoever builds a system, right? And they have this idea and then they give it to the users, and then the users just kind of go off and do something else with it, right? They kind of make their own sort of workflow, their own work process. And so we need to think carefully about what we create. We need to anticipate that here's what we're designing, but the way it might actually end up being used, you're gonna have to leave a little flexibility, because people are gonna maybe take it and make it their own and bring it into their sort of, their social group, their business, political unit. And then they're gonna kind of operate using these sort of tribal sort of psychology, and they're going to make it their own. And it's going to become something that's a little bit different than what we design. And this is very true, with policy issues. I mean, we're going to design something from a data perspective. We're going to give it to policymakers, and they're going to take it and deploy it, and they're going to have a different idea of what it means. But then when it's actually deployed, the people that it impacts, the citizens or whoever, they're going to have a different idea of what it means. And so it's going to become different than what we designed, right? We should also keep in mind that if there is like a lot of, say, fancy analysis or machine learning or other, complicated sort of data science, tech going on in our proposal, that there's this technical literacy in the general public that's going to limit their ability to understand it. So they are going to understand it up to a certain level. And so beyond that, it's often to them, it's just kind of like magic. Like they just press buttons on a website and back comes this solution, and it's just all kind of magical. And they don't really think about how it works, right? It's like driving a car. You're probably not thinking a whole lot about how the engine works. You're just driving the car. But this also means, because we want policymakers to use our solutions, that we need to be careful about the way we design things and make sure that some of the complexity is kind of hidden away, because there's going to be a limit to what they can actually understand and what they can actually deploy, right? And then this gets into a whole different topic of education and data science education and stuff like that. We probably should increase the technical literacy of the general population, but that's beyond the scope of this program. We should just, for our purposes, realize that what we design, it can be as complex as it needs to be, but at some point we have to be able to deliver back interfaces or information to people in a way that is within the literacy level, the technical literacy level that those people have. If it goes beyond that, they're not going to understand it, they're not going to use it, or they're going to misuse it, right? So we need to think carefully about what's a reasonable expectation of, if we deliver this solution back to diplomats at some embassy, what's a reasonable expectation for what they understand and how they're going to think about it and what they're actually going to do with the information, right? Very kind of subtle, but important. Now, from a policy issue, there are actually a lot of policy evaluation methods. These are taken from a paper, Runhar, in 2006, and I think it's quite interesting that these are actually very similar to a lot of HCI evaluation methods, right? So things like reconstruction policy theory, trying to link policy effects to desired goals, stakeholder analysis. So these are like focus groups or case studies. We go look at the people that are going to be impacted and try to get their information, get their sort of insights. Impact assessments. We do cost benefit analyses. We can do TIS course analysis, right? If you actually look at policy making, actually, there's a lot of similarities between the way people evaluate policies and the effects of a proposed policy solution, and the way people evaluate, sort of human-computer interaction interfaces and like sort of data science solutions, and the way that information interacts with the end user. There's a lot of overlap here. So you guys might even be able to use some of these things, or at least propose them in as part of your project of doing some of this stuff, or having it as part of an ongoing solution. Now, within the scope of our project here, we're not going to really have time to do all this. I mean, we're going to do our analysis and make our proposal. So for you guys, a lot of this is probably going to come out in the design sketch, as sort of we're going to have this component as part of our proposed solution that's going to be soliciting ongoing feedback, or maybe we'll have focus groups. You're not going to actually go run the focus groups unless you really want to, because we're not going to have time to do it within the scope of this course, or do stakeholder analysis or these things. I mean, you might be able to try to do some of them, kind of mock them a little bit, but in reality, we have limited time, so we probably can't really do a lot of it, but we can plan for it as part of our solution, and you guys should, because otherwise your solution, your final proposal, is missing some important parts, right? So you should also probably think about these with your design sketches and your proposal you're about to make. How are we going to actually know that our system is useful, and what are our users going to see, and how are we going to get that back to them, right? So part of your project then needs to consider some sort of evaluation, and preferably as data scientists, we should probably have some data collection component of this, so we can evaluate our solution, our policy in a data-driven sense, right? One thing to keep in mind here is we're not selling t-shirts to people. We're not building machine learning models to figure out how to make our business sell more t-shirts. The proposed policies that we're going to put out there, they're going to have real impacts on real people. And so we definitely need to make sure that we're doing this stuff, because otherwise we might impact people in a way that actually has a very negative impact. And that would be, of course, not what we want. Okay. So all this stuff you're talking about today, these are things you need to think about as part of these design sketches and policy and proposals, and all the stuff you guys basically working on over the next few weeks before we get into the sort of final analysis and doing everything. So the design sketches are due next week. If you don't remember what those are, I talked about them at length last week. And then after that, we'll have proposal, and we'll also have our midterm update. I'll put this here. I'll probably mention it again next week just to make sure I remind you guys one more time. We're going to do in a few weeks here, I said on May 6th, on that Friday, we're going to have our midterm update. So each group should prepare a short PowerPoint about what you've learned so far and kind of what you're planning, right? This is not a final report. It's just like kind of a progress report. Here's kind of what we've accomplished, and here's what we're anticipating that we're going to do over the next few weeks before the end of the semester. So the rules for this is 5 slides max, 5 slides, no more. 3 minutes long max. I'll cut you off, right? And we'll do this on Zoom, so we'll just kind of go around in a circle that Friday morning, and each of you'll take 3 minutes, and then we'll probably be done in 20-30 minutes, basically, right? I might ask a question or two, but we'll just kind of go around in a circle. So we need to make sure that every group has most of their people there. Not all of you need to talk, but you should designate at least 1 or 2 people to do the speaking. And then focus on the big picture, right? Or, well, let me say this. You can all speak if you want to, right? If all 4 of you want to speak, you're fine. That's fine. But if you want to, you can also just have 1 or 2 people just be the designated speaker. Focus on the big picture, not every detail, okay? You only got 5 slides, so we're just kind of trying to understand the big picture of what you've done, what you've learned, and where you're kind of going, okay? And that's kind of the main takeaway. I'll talk about this again in a couple of weeks. If you have any questions about it, please let me know, but please plan on being there on the 6th to do our midterm update, because I'm interested in seeing kind of where you guys are, and then that'll also help us when we kind of give you feedback on your final sort of project proposal before you start doing the last few weeks of analysis, okay? Let you guys go. Hope you guys have a nice week, and I will be talking to you soon. All right, thanks.